everybody, and welcome to Betweenplays Stock Market Strategies. With us today, we have Tech with Sandeep. Hey, Sandeep, how you doing?
Excellent. Thanks very much.
And we have here our guest expert speaker, Greg Willis. Hi, Greg. How you doing today?
Hey guys, doing very well. Great to be on with you.
Just so that we can get a little bit of background for our viewers, I know that you're known in your industry and probably throughout the whole world. But for those that don't know anything about you, would you be willing to go a little bit into your background in order to put us up to speed?
Sure, happy to. So quick background, 30 plus years as a media and tech executive. Grew up in the business at HBO way back when, running affiliate sales for part of the company, and then moved on to work for the Food Network that I actually helped start. Was one of the initial employees, got that off the ground from absolutely nothing to a full-fledged network and sold that to Scripps. Joined Scripps to then become a GM of DIY. Worked and then went on to work for Liberty Media for Vox Music Network, all sales. So that's my content background. And then I've worked for a number of technology companies, everything from Ascent Media, which was owned by Liberty, to HP, to a couple of streaming companies. One of the early ones, IVT, New Lion, who's big in sports, to working for HP and then IBM, and most recently Endeavor. So I've been deep into the content space, understand not only the business models, the digital workflow, but the evolution of the business, right? Went through cable, satellite, so forth and so on, and currently, work in that space, and very fortunate to have a lot of good friends and contacts around the world in the media as well as telecommunications space.
That's super interesting. And I know that, Sandeep has also his background in the telecommunication space. So what I'd like to do now is to hand this over to Sandeep so that way you guys can have this very intellectual conversation, excuse me, and bring all of us novice people up to speed on, what's been going out there in the past, where we are in the present, and I guess where you all believe that we may be heading in the future. All right, Sandeep, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Al. Thanks for that. So Greg, you and I have worked together for a number of years, and we've had a great relationship. And I'm so pleased to have you on the show. So I will reiterate what Al said. Thanks for being on the show. So what I'd like to go through today is just kind of follow your content background, just kind of like figure out, where you started to where we are now, and how the model works, and where the model, I don't want to say fails, but perhaps needs work, or perhaps is a little bit broken or a little bit tragic, and then figure out what the disruption actually is, what comes after streaming, and then talk a little bit about churn challenges and things like that.
Sure.
So why don't you just start with your beginnings, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah, happy to. So what's interesting about the media business, if you look at it, it's gone through multiple phases of disruption. And I think today is probably going through one of the biggest periods of disruption. You go back in time, I don't go too far back, but radio, television, then came cable, then came satellite, VHS, DVDs, worked its way on to internet. Every time it went through a transformation, everyone thought, oh my God, the world's going to fall apart. Well, guess what? Broadcast is still here and still very healthy. Cable has grown. Satellite took off. It was the hot new product in the 90s. Now it's going the wrong direction because broadband, is really here, and that's a centralized way of delivering content as well as communication devices, you name it. So it's evolved. And then you look at the technology business in the last 20 years, Google, Amazon, others coming onto the scene, major disruptors. If you'd ask someone 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they would be the leader in cloud and one of the leading providers of content, you would say you're out of your mind. Guess what? That's what they're doing today. Why? Because they're looking at the overall relationship and trying to create the best delivery of products. But if you look at the evolution and where we stand today, briefly said, the advertising business always plays catch up to the technology. And by that, I mean, the consumer now controls what they want, when they want to watch it, versus appointment television. In broadcast, you delivered a spot, You ran, 12, 14 minutes an hour of commercials. There were breaks, there were promos. It was locked in. Cable
Right.
came along, it got more complicated, then more channels. But now, internet came along, and look at Google, it's done a phenomenal job. They created search that solved a lot of problems for the internet. Where can I find stuff? That hasn't happened today in streaming. So streaming's still figuring that out. You often see a spot that is just a billboard saying we'll be back in a minute because they can't insert the spot. So there's a lot of disruption. Today, streaming accounts for 40% of viewership, but only 20% of the revenue. Why? Because ad sales hasn't caught up. The business models aren't working, quite frankly. Yet everyone's trying to grow the business and dramatically grow it. Look what's happened since the pandemic. Discovery Plus, Disney Plus, all these. Paramount now is on the scene. Everyone's on the scene because they're actually realizing that the people they were licensing content to, Google, Prime, Netflix, all of a sudden now are the competitors. So it's become a much more competitive marketplace, and everyone's trying to figure out those models. The other comment I'd make is, if you're a studio, if you're Warner Brothers or Universal, you made a movie or a show, you put it on broadcast, it was licensed, and if you happen to own the station, it's great. Then it went to cable, if you happen to own those, it's great, but you license it out globally and around the world. Now, all of a sudden, you're like, well, I'm not going to license to Netflix or Google, so I'm going to hold on to it. So you're losing your opportunities in terms of revenue. And all that stuff needs to get shaken out and worked out to, quite frankly, figure out what the business model is for streaming. I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a couple more years of shakeout. My projection for this year is there'll be a lot of acquisitions because there's a lot of companies that just aren't going to survive, either in the content space or in the technology space. But it's an exciting time to be in the business because it's changing. It's a tough time because there's a lot of unfortunate layoffs going on because everyone thinks the recession is going to be bigger than hopefully it will be, but we'll see what happens. But it's exciting. It's a lot going on, but it's an evolution. I feel that we're in some phase. In 10 years now, we'll look back when we've gone, if we ever go to Metaverse, and look back at this time as when streaming was sort of in its disruptive time.
So let me ask you then, Greg. So you touched on a couple of really interesting points, right? So we're talking about the advertising catching up with the content management. I know the old school model was, he who has the most libraries wins, or she who has the most libraries wins. So if you have the most movies, you win, right? And that's what makes your company valuable. But then you look at the Netflixes that are spending billions of dollars on new shows, and going into debt to do that, to create content that's exclusive. And even Amazon's doing the same with Amazon Studios, etc. Like, how does that fare in terms of that? And especially now, as Netflix has suddenly pivoted and said, we're going to create an advertising model. I don't know what it's going to be, whether it's going to be persistent ads every 15 minutes like the old school model was, but it seems to be like people are pulling a lot of pieces out of old school models to apply them to streaming, which I personally don't think are going to work, but that's my opinion.
So there's a lot of interesting things you brought up. So I go a couple of different directions. One of them is a study that was just done by Evan Shapiro, is that 70% of viewers, consumers, would accept advertising in their streaming platform, assuming it's the right balance of advertising versus overload. 2 years ago, Netflix, when it really took off, or maybe 3 years ago, even pre-pandemic, people loved it because there were no commercials and they could binge and watch all day long. Yeah. Well, guess what? The world has now changed now, and also it was less expensive. And cable was more expensive than, whether it's Hulu, whether it's YouTube TV, whether it's Sling, whatever it is you're subscribing to, DirecTV View, all these different services. All of a sudden, those prices have all gone up. So things are starting to even out in terms of from a cost standpoint. But I think where the real challenge in the marketplace beyond advertising, but advertising impacted by this, is the consumer is thoroughly confused, right? 1 month I'm in Netflix, I'm in now HBO Max, which is merging with Discovery Plus. You've got Paramount Plus that's shown up on the scene. Wait, I watch Yellowstone on Paramount, but then if I want to watch a year from now and I'm new to the show, I have to go find it on NBC, who, by the way, is their competitor. So the consumer is confused, whereas in the olden days, it would have gone from studio to network to syndication to, somewhere in there was home video. Well, now it could jump from Paramount to NBC to Peacock. So there's a lot of confusion. I think the customer experience, literally, people are accustomed to flipping channels. Well, you can't flip from Netflix to Peacock. You got to go out of one app into another app. So it's a little bit different than just flip the channel. And I think the biggest challenge, or excuse me, biggest opportunity is analytics. Is that whether it's Google or whoever figures out to apply what Google did to traditional internet search to the video business, and somehow do it across, and it's going to be hard because this, they're all competing. But if you like watching this, you might enjoy watching this. It might be on a different service, it could be on a competing service, or within the same service. So there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of challenge. Without a doubt, advertising is being impacted. I mean, we're seeing a softening of the economy, which is seeing a softening of advertising. But one last data point: they just announced Fox. They sold a Super Bowl 30-second spot for $7 million. Anheuser-Busch bought 3 of them, right? So on one hand, they're spending world records for live sporting event, and sporting rights are going through the roof because they're, particularly for whether it's World Cup or Super Bowl or things like that. Major League Baseball just set a record again for revenue from all the teams. So it's crazy. It's really evolving. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's having an impact on jobs, but at the same time, it's an exciting time. So a lot of stuff going on.
So,
do you mind if I chime in for a second?
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know if you could just write down your thought there, Sandeep. I found a lot of the stuff that Greg was saying extremely interesting because, in our daily lives, like I'm a huge football fan, meaning soccer, the European one. But depends on who's calling it from where, right? But and listen, I was on DAZN, and it had everyone. It had the Italian league, the French league. It had the the UK. I mean, it was crazy. It had every single one of them, and then it had the Champions League games on there. It was like a one-stop shop for soccer fans. So immediately I jumped on the boat. They ended up losing almost all of them to Fubo TV or something like that. And then they ended up having 1 or 2 things on there. And then Rogers got some other stuff and whatever. And then you're just going, well, wait a minute now. If I just want to see soccer, all right, because it doesn't work like the way the NHL works. And for soccer, the NHL, it's one league and that's it. They're just playing different cities. And you just look at the Stanley Cup. Soccer is made completely different. It's got all these different levels. It's got all these different leagues. But if you don't look at these, if you're a big soccer fan, all these leagues are just one thing. It's just soccer. It's Europeans. So the problem I find, and interesting what you're saying about jumping through apps, is that when you want to watch a show like The Handmaid's Tale, which was on Crave or something like that before, and then I think Amazon picked them up. But you have to in order to see one show, you're paying for one thing. And now you have to pay Rogers. And now you have to pay this. And now you have to pay that. Now we're in this world now. And Sandeep and I, we were speaking about this at one point. The internet was supposed to stop all this, be cheaper than common cable. It's more expensive now because you got to pay for the internet and then you got to pay for all these apps. So we're out of pocket even more because if I want my kids to watch Disney and now YouTube's got a different thing for children, there's going to be different things for kids along the board. And if you want to see a movie here like Marvel, well, you better go on Disney. If you want to see that there, so now we're stuck. In my view, if it's going to be like that, the old ways of just clicking through channels was a hell of a lot better because I was paying one service provider and I'm getting everything. So it's almost like a catch-22 that we're in at the moment.
It's a catch-22 in some regards. It's also going back to old business models, meaning that you have the creation of fast channels. So if you are Viacom and you own some incredible brands, Nickelodeon to MTV and everything in between, Those are now being spun out into free channels, as well as channels licensed to the satellite and content, distributors, whether it's Comcast or whoever it may be. But they're literally trying to scatter the market and get into every connected TV. Connected TV is one of the fastest growing areas, because if you're Samsung or LG, you have your portfolio of channels. So you're now licensing, most of them being free, to pull all this content in and getting a piece of that advertising. So they're becoming the cable operator in a way.
Yeah.
So there's all these changes going on. But to your point about viewership, and for example, I'm a New York Yankee fan, or if you're a Rangers fan in New York, where do you watch that? It's unless you add it on to your service, or some games might end up like in football on Amazon, but not other places. So you have to be Amazon. Well, if you don't have Amazon Prime, you're not getting football. So it is a disservice. And then today I'm just reading that the regional sports networks in the US are about to go bankrupt again. And the firm that bought them out of bankruptcy. 15 years ago, some of the most valuable assets in the media business were regional sports networks, because it was the New York Yankees with Yes Network. It was Boston with the Celtics, and the Bruins, LA. These things, when they popped up in the 90s and 2000s, they were worth gazillions of dollars. Now all of a sudden they're, because those individual channels are struggling to create regional sport network that get subscription. They relied on cable, and they were sort of propped up by cable because they were made part of the package. Then they were peeled away. But but to your point, cable got expensive, and now streaming is getting expensive.
So,
And then the harder part is, how do you navigate?
so
No one
Greg,
ever used a guide. Traditionally in the cable business or broadcast, the average consumer had 10 to 12 networks they watched. Maybe it's news and sports and movies, depending on what you lifestyle, Food Network, Home and Garden, Discovery, whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
Now, you can get those channels in one place, but if you want to get more of it, and that's one of the great benefits of cable. There are more channels dedicated to that genre. Well, now streaming, it's gone like turbocharged, but now it's confusing because it's still all about the money. And I go back to my Yellowstone example. You watch the premiere of that on Paramount, but let's say a year from now, you'd never watched it and you want to watch the first season. It's not on Paramount. It's over on Peacock. That's like the Yankees trading to the Red Sox. I mean, that's as competitive as it gets. And the consumer's like, well, wait, who makes the show? I mean, you ask people today, where did you watch X? They're like, I don't remember. Whereas before, I believe, in this research to back this up, you knew Game of Thrones was on HBO. You knew Sopranos. Even though later it got syndicated and went somewhere, all the series were there. The new ones came out. It was kept there. It might have been sold off or syndicated somewhere else, but it wasn't like you took Game of Thrones and all of a sudden you put it over on Showtime. That would never happen. And those two were the competitors in the United States, right? So I think that the consumer's confused. The business models are challenging. Is the consumer better off? They have easier access to it, sort of. I mean, you can get more stuff, but flipping channels and finding shows, can be challenging. For younger demos, maybe it's easier, and they're actually more willing to pay for it, believe it or not, than older demos. Some of the research proves. So it'll be interesting to see where this business goes. I think the idea of Disney Plus and Netflix with advertising makes complete sense, because you'll have someone who can't afford to get, whether it's Prime to get something, and Prime's got ad free and not ad free. There's got to be something for everybody, because not every demographic is going to spend $100 a month on video. Never mind the data, just to get the video.
So let me ask you a question then, right? Because the old syndication model is the whole Chuck Berry model, right? So and that was brilliant, and you were able to resell the same content over and over and over again, regionalize it. Having done a stint in the film industry and television and all that stuff, I understand like regionalization of content in, like, say, Germany or the US or certain states or whatever the case may be. And even Netflix is sort of doing a similar kind of syndicated model, meaning that you only get certain content streamed in certain countries like the UK versus the US, and that's why people go out and get these weird VPN streaming services. But so two questions. One is, is the syndication model dead? And do we just need to give everything to everyone? Because it really seems to be refranchising and reselling the same thing over and over again, which was how that model was built. But the other question is the consumer going to put up with that? Right. So Better Call Saul comes out all 6 seasons, one shot in the UK, but it's released 1 week at a time in Canada or the United States.
Yeah, the tough part with doing that, I understand that, and that's been going on, is, you know, I don't want to even bring up the word Napster, but you know what Napster did to the music business, and there is a smaller form of it in the video business. You know, you can find those things out there, which is unfortunate because it does take money to create the content. It takes money to pay for that content. So it's, but if you have a show, you know, you think of the movie business, if Maverick had only been released in the United States and nowhere else for a month, it would have been illegally just all over the place. But you know, the studios get smart and release it everywhere at the same time. In terms of, that's a mega movie, right? But you know, it is challenging because if you're delivering Netflix into India versus Netflix into the UK versus the US, the price points are totally different, right? And but the content still costs money to make. But the good news for Netflix is they have, one of the advantages they have is they showed up later to the party, right? And they weren't caught up in all these old contracts as some of the big networks and studios were, or they didn't have rights to the talent to go beyond the US. When we launched the Food Network, we never really thought we'd go outside the US. This is 1993. In 1995, we had to go renegotiate all our contracts with all of our talent. Relatively, you know, easy to do because we weren't that big yet. If you're a big studio or a network, you've got to go do all your talent, you know, deals to go international. So now, you know, and so before you just negotiate the contract for distribution with Comcast or the cable companies, done. Now it's every form you can imagine, you know, from airlines to digital streaming to podcast versions to whatever versions. So it's more complicated. But I think back to your syndication question, it's going to change it because what ABC would sell to a syndicator to sell across the US, you know, that might not get syndicated because it might end up on one of these multicast networks that they own or a cable network. I mean, if you go in, there's 1,400 fast channels. I mean, how do you find out what's on fast channel? You go into your LG TV, you go into your, or Pluto or one of those fast services and you find it. But you know, it's almost content overload. It's almost like 1995, the internet. You knew it was there, you couldn't find anything. Television, there's so much content, and despite that, I will say there's underserved markets. You know, we talk about diversity in different markets in different parts of the country or the world in terms of types of content that's not being delivered. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the small guys to come up that are underserved because it's cheaper to produce content today. It's just harder to get it to eyeballs. Because if you're not going to be on Discovery Plus or Disney Plus, you're going your own route. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But there's, you know.
So let me ask you a question then. So in terms of disruption, okay, so streaming is basically disrupting, you know, the traditional networks, cable. You know, cable was the original disruptor of traditional TV or broadcast linear TV, if you will, even though cable was still fairly linear. I think that, like, you know, streaming is now, it's non-linear. You can watch what you want, how you want. I mean, I just saw something called Kaleidoscope where they even set up the episodes that you can watch all 9 episodes in any order that you want, and you have to figure out the story. I think that's a Netflix show, and that was quite brilliant in terms of concept, right? I'm not sure everyone's going to buy into that, but the question I have is, so with all these different services that we're all paying, and like effectively we're now, like Albert said, we're now paying probably more for all of our streaming services. If you're a Star Wars fan, you want to watch Andor, you got to buy Disney Plus, right? If you are you know, a Yellowstone fan, I think you got to watch it on Netflix. I don't even know, and this is to your point of, I don't even know where to watch any of this stuff. Yeah. So a meta search, a meta engine, something that can track all this stuff. I mean, there's a market for something like that where you can literally, I don't know, pay $1 a month, or maybe it's free, and you just go, where can I watch this stuff? Because even going to the web and looking for it, they're not even sure. Half the time you're just getting reviews of the TV shows that are saying whether they're good or not. And so, I mean, where do you, so jump off of that point there in terms of the meta search or the search, and give us a sense of what your feeling is as to how that might work, and also where you think the next big disruption might come from.
So a couple of things on your question or questions. One, if you look just at today's earnings of Peacock, we just had a $978 million loss. Disney a couple of weeks ago, $1.4 billion. And I bring that for a reason. These guys have been focused on acquisition. And if you have Verizon Wireless, you can get Disney Plus for free. I mean, HBO Max was part of AT&T when AT&T owned them briefly. I mean, so it's an all-out sales effort to acquire subscribers. But the bigger problem is the churn, and the churn rates have picked up. Some have leveled off, some have picked up. And then you look at the cost of creating content and the investment there. I think there's a real opportunity in the business to, one, lower the production cost. ESPN just ran a live, end-to-end, all run through the cloud. So you look at technology to lower costs. You look at AI and analytics. There's a number of folks in the marketplace, a couple of interesting companies that they're just getting their funding around analytics for video. So, a couple of years ago, Netflix did $1 million challenge. If you can create our, recommendation engine, we'll pay you $1 million. I don't know if they actually ever paid that out. Where I'm going with this is that I think analytics and AI are going to be critical. The challenge is, is Warner Brothers, Discovery going to do that themselves? Yes. Disney's over here with ESPN. You got Hulu as part of that. You got Paramount, right? It's not going to be a uniform way to do it. What the cable companies try to do is create their own search. It was generally a voice-activated remote control. Take me to Friends. Some of that today, in today's more modern world, is starting to work, whether it's through your LG or your Samsung, or whether it's through your Alexa or through Google. It's hit or miss, right? You'll say a show and it comes back with nothing, or it comes back with a whole bunch of them. Right. I think those need to advance, and it needs to analyze what you're watching, and that could be a household, which one's watching what, and make recommendations. And the networks need to figure that out. I think there will be opportunities, to make improvements so that you'll actually be able to find things you like to watch that, that are sort of, whether it's news, sports, whatever it may be, whatever your category is.
So you hit on something here, which I think is really important to maybe dive in a little bit on, is churn, right? Because I know that everybody is, because of the pandemic, everybody was binge watching. Everybody was like, screw it, I'll pay for all my services because I'm not going out, I'm not driving, not paying for gas, not doing this kind of stuff. Now everybody's getting back into the workforce, back doing things. People are mandated to go back to offices. And so there's more cost that's going on, right? So in terms of churn, I mean, notwithstanding, excuse me, notwithstanding anything, globally impacting like wars and things like that are going on, do you feel that churn is going to consolidate itself, meaning that there's I almost want to say the one ring to win them all, if you will, right? So, like a ring of power where somebody will show up and say, here's the one ring, you come here, we will deliver all of the content, and you pay one price, and we will be less than the cable companies? Or do you think that there's going to be a constant churn with everyone fighting over Cager for, from one organization to another?
So a couple of things. I think content is still king, meaning that when people find something they like, and that could be a Food Network chef on a show, that could be Yellowstone, that could be Star Wars, that could be whatever it is. So finding your content and searching that out. But what's interesting when you take companies like Amazon or even Google, or Apple, you can have video, you can have music, you can sort of weave into that e-commerce. You've got your Prime, which gets you I mean, there's different hooks, and podcasts, the last couple of years have taken off in a big way. So if I can actually go to one app and get more stuff, right? And maybe if I subscribe, it's a little bit of what cable did, right? First it was video, then it was internet, then it was voice. Here's the triple play,
Right.
And then mobile, so now it's the quad play. Well, that's sort of gone away a little bit, but maybe those types of packaging, if you're Prime, it's like, hey, you can get your video here, you can get your Amazon Music here. Cable companies try to tap into the alarm business and IoT and networking as another hook. We'll take care of your house for you if you just stay with us. And cable is still doing great with broadband. Broadband is growing. You got 5G that's coming. You've got digital, television that's coming. So there's a lot more networking and capabilities that are coming, which people don't talk that much about, except it is what makes this whole thing run, right? If you can't connect, and there's more and more usage of these things. So we need, I complain because I have a gig in my house, right? And I don't get enough speed. Well, because we got multiple devices going on. I got 28 devices connected to my house. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but everything's connected and talking to us, but maybe not talking to us, but it's interesting. You talk a little about telco and IoT, right? And devices. I mean, devices that you have. I can start my car remotely. I can do this. I can do that. The consumer wants it easier, simpler. How do I get to my television simpler? How do I make my life simpler, right? And if you can make my access to my content easier, there might be a play for someone to come out and I don't know, there's so many big companies. Google's not going to all of a sudden say we are the ones who can do all of it. They claim they can with Google TV. They just bought NFL ticket. So who knows?
And you and I are old enough to know, but and so is Albert, to know that there was this word convergence that we all talked about 25 years ago, and it just kind of went away because we somehow never got it to happen or get it done. It seems like it's now, whether anybody wants it or not, it's being forced upon us, which is fine because I actually like the idea of convergence. But also based on everything you're telling me or what I'm hearing is it doesn't seem like we're quite there yet, but it seems like we're on the precipice of it. I mean, would you agree, or what do you think?
I think if you look at it from a company standpoint, there's two times at least that they tried to converge, right? In the 90s and then in the 2000s, right? And just more recently, AT&T buys DirecTV, buys, Warner Brothers. That blew up. That didn't work. Back in the 90s, whenever it was, when all the Verizons were merging, or all telcos were merging, and then they were buying different people. I think the businesses remain separate. I think it's the converging, the use of the technology, right? It's the networking, the IoT, the edge, right? Enabling you to access and put certain ads, to do today in technology down to the zip code. I'm working with a company right now called Telios, and they can do streaming down to the zip code. And they do it for one of the large cable providers as a streaming platform. So if you want to deliver an ad to a zip code, versus just running your ad across whatever coverage that network has or whatever that platform has. But I think the convergence of technology of it's again, you're doing home shopping, delivery to your house, watching your video, all these things are becoming connected. And it really is driven by the consumer saying, this is when I want my video, my cell phone to do all these things. The iPhone is probably one of the big things that help create some of that convergence, because you're watching, or even Samsung, a lot of video on your mobile.
Sure.
People, you'll never watch video on your mobile. And then it took off like a rocket. It's leveled off. People still like the big screen, but they love their mobile, or whether they're watching a highlight from a game, they download it and they're watching it on a plane or whatever it may be. So there's definitely, Apple's right there in a great spot. They have the technology. They also think about the consumer experience and create that incredible seamless experience that some others can't create.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, and I'll throw in there as well too, right? I mean, way back in the early 90s, way too early. We went and did a pitch deck of a streaming music service, which wasn't really streaming, it was downloading WAV files because there were no fat pipes at the time. And we were told no one will ever listen to music on the internet. And, our lives are completely changed, 30 years later. Not because of me, just generally speaking, right? So that perspective is really, really good. I guess, Al, did you want to say something? Because otherwise I've got another question.
Well, I find it all very, very interesting, because the thing is that what always comes back down to me is, you know, um, this is only working, and this is only capable, to actually function if there's telecommunications companies. So the thing is that, yeah, Apple's big, Google's big, they're all big, but in reality, the way I see it, they're little flies, because if the telecommunication company doesn't exist, none of this exists.
There's no infrastructure at that point.
Exactly. And I find it very interesting that, because Greg mentioned IoT, Internet of Things, and the more that comes into play in the future, I mean, when we look at the stock market, I keep on saying to myself, man, we're talking about, you know, um, big sports leagues and, going bankrupt or whatever, and all these types of things. But then you have these kids that are playing online. They're, on Twitch, these, gaming platforms that they're, and they're filling up arenas and stuff. And we see this change. But at the end of the day, you need that zero trust, which we've brought up so many times before, Sandeep. It has to be there. It must be there. When we come back down to the things that, when we mentioned IoTs, we're looking at that car, that self-driving autonomous vehicle, which is dependent on it at all. Because if you're going to turn your chair around to talk to the person in the back there, which they show, that you're supposed to be able to do, all right, well, you got to make sure that the grid doesn't go down at any moment, or that doctor that's making that operation from, another country over, with some robotics that's inside over this, so all these things that we're talking about, from where we were to where we are now and where we're going, it keeps on coming back to me how much power the telecommunications industries actually have. It's just insane, especially in the future.
Yeah, just following on that, Comcast just released their earnings, and Brian Roberts talked about the fact that even though video disconnects are up, and their overall business is very positive because of all the things you're talking about. Their broadband is better. Their mobile is taken off. They've got a partnership with Charter around streaming, so that's got potential. They've even got an alarm business, but their broadband and their business to business stuff is growing because they're delivering high quality broadband and supporting IoT. In fact, I worked with them on an IoT project a few years ago when I was at IBM. So everyone's trying to figure out how to make their service better in terms of reliability. And you're right, the underlying internet and broadband, and I'll throw in some satellite in the middle of all that because a lot of that's connecting.
Yeah.
All that is absolutely critical, and I still go, if I go back for a second, you hear about outages every once in a while. In fact, I had one in my cable system 2 days ago for 4 hours. I don't think the last time I had one for 4 hours, because usually they fix it within a couple minutes. But networks, when 9/11 happened, I have to go back to that day, is when a number of companies realized they didn't have backups to anything. And when New York and so much communication was going through the World Trade Center.
Like the Rogers outage that even happened recently.
Company all of a sudden boardroom was saying we need a backup plan, right? Well, today, fast forward years later, it's got to be that good, because whether it's an unfortunate event that happens, or a storm, or something, how do you get that redundancy, and how do you get to keep these things going? Yourself in a driverless car, when all of a sudden a major data center goes down, well, there's got to be a backup. And that's one of the beauties of cloud, right? And whether you're IBM Cloud or AWS or Google or Azure or Alibaba's, they actually make that redundancy a lot easier than the old school have your own data center. So I think the evolution of all that will continue. And Sandeep, because we work together on IBM's cloud for telecommunications, because you guys are partnering in that. it's creating that next generation of connectivity that's cloud driven. That there's no hardware. It's the hardware back in the IBM data center cloud, or the Google, or the AWS, but those have to continue to evolve as well. And I think there's more and more things coming down the road, that will also positively affect the television and video business, because you're going to get a better signal when you have 5G, real 5G, where it's everywhere, not bits and pieces that we have today. Despite, if you listen to all the ads from T-Mobile, you think we all have 5G. When you really have that signal, maybe that becomes 10G or whatever G that the next G is, or 6G or 7 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Where you need broadband, right? I mean, who knows where the world's going? Everything will just be wireless.
I just have one more question, Sandeep, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Okay. And I know this is probably for another show. Okay. I just want to know if I'm if my brain is working in this context, right? Because I'm a novice here, like probably most of the listeners out there. And I just want to make sure, because when I'm investing, I always want to know what's the future technology. I don't want to invest something that's dying, right? I don't want to be in a dying industry. I want to be in an industry that looks more like it's the future, right? A lot of people talking about metaverse, failing in certain aspects and all this kind of stuff. But when I'm listening to you talk, and when I've, look at all the research I've done and listen to Sandeep as well and everything like that, I'm not too sure if one is interrelated. So that's why I just would like to have some clarity here. So when we're talking about the cloud, that's why it's so important. We're saying the cloud is so important because of these things that we're talking about. When we talk about the cloud and we talk about the metaverse, this metaverse that they're trying to create, okay, like this big picture metaverse. And I'm not just talking about the Facebook metaverse, but the ones that the big engineers back there, the big alphabet companies are talking about, right? Is that really as important as what we need in the future when we look at cloud versus that kind of a world in order to move forward, and blockchain? Like, is that, I mean, I know it's probably for another show, but are they interrelated? I just need a yes or no, pretty much.
I think there's some, yeah, they are interrelated. I mean, metaverse, we'll see where that ends up, where that, there's a lot of hype right now about it, given what Facebook has done. But I look at the basic core business. When you talk about investment, it's security, it's protecting people's privacy, it's being able to deliver. So the cloud hyperscalers continuing to invest and bringing partners in who can solve, I'll call them future problems. Every day there's an outage. Every day there's all sorts of bad stuff going on, in terms of cybersecurity. And you think about it from a government standpoint, it's a whole nother level. Right now, it's not, people don't worry about someone launching a missile. They worry about someone turning off the electric grid in New York City. Imagine if you turned off New York City.
Absolutely.
Toronto or LA or who knows where, right?
Yep.
And so I think you look at companies, I won't start quoting names, but there are a lot of great brands in security that I look at and I invest in, because this is going to be a never ending challenge, right? You get into metaverse and other things that are more exposing your information. Again, security, networking business is absolutely critical to all the things we talked about. I think this shift in digital workflows for production companies. Some of the movies you watch, you think, how do they make that? They never went on location. This is all done in the studio with a green screen, and that continues to advance and get better. I mean, that's the cool thing, is that we continue as a world, not just the United States and Canada, but growing and evolving technology to fulfill the demand, I think, now of the consumer. It used to be the business that sold to the consumer. Now the consumer is saying, I want it better, faster, cheaper. And younger demographics, they're like, well, we always had Uber. No, we didn't. Uber didn't exist 15 years ago. We always had an iPhone. No, they were created before you were born. What do you mean you didn't have a cell phone, right? So, I mean, but the audience is anyone who's under the age of 30 has grown up with a cell phone, if not, older than that. It's just, why? Yeah, I had one in college. I had one when I was in, now they're unfortunately giving it to them like 5 years old, but whatever. But again, those generations are expecting even more. They want to have, and maybe they'll want that virtual meta experience. But again, it's an exciting time to be in the business.
Everything you're saying is quite incredible, and the technology is advancing so fast that I'm gonna, because I like having a conversation here, and Sometimes I see certain things that just make my mind go, what? Are you kidding me? No, I got to figure out how they're doing this. So I'm just going to basically say, like, you know, sometimes they allow us to see, I say they allow us to see certain little things, take a peek into the future of what they can actually do. I don't know if you've ever seen a child show called Dancing Monsters.
I don't know.
Well,
Neither.
I have two little very small children, and this TV show is using very sophisticated 3D holographic projections and stuff where they have created, because it's basically what you're saying, they created a studio somewhere else and an exact studio in front of a live audience. People are wearing all these, devices. The dancers are wearing all these devices, where you put on a green screen, but they're in another location completely far away.
Right.
It's all
In
being
in the show, you have a dancing alien, a dancing robot that's moving its lips, closing its eyes. It has a shadow, creates a shadow, and it has reflection on the dance floor. And I'm going, how is it possible that a hologram is reflecting off of the windows and creates a shadow? It's mind-boggling because my brain is going, there's a person in that suit. Wait a minute. That's not even a suit. That's a hologram.
so here,
It's insane. It's a child's show.
so here's the thing that I'll input on that, right? Is that we've got like what's coming, as Greg kind of intimated, is what's coming is going to be out of control for a while. I agree that there's a whole bunch of mergers and acquisitions that are about to show up that are going to be unexpected. But a lot of these companies are running on very heavy debt, as Greg kind of pointed out, which means that they're going to have no choice but to do that. And it seems a little bit like the old model of buying up content. As you said, he who controls the content is king, right? It's kind of like the country of the blind. So it's really interesting, and I agree it's an exciting time, especially in content and media. I agree that the model isn't quite fleshed out, and there's definitely room for someone or something to come in and create a meta structure around, whether it's based on an AI or Chat GPT or whatever it is, that will be able to go out and figure out your content, not just based on your, oh, I clicked on this ad and I clicked on this ad and you might like this and you might like that, but like something genuine based on what you actually are looking to consume, right? Because that's the other thing too, is that I find is our lives have accelerated since I was 25, which was, I don't know how many years ago. Life has accelerated to a point now where you must consume, everything must be on demand. You got to answer your email right away. You got to answer your text message right away, even though text messaging was created so you didn't have to answer right away. Get away from the whole weird BlackBerry on demand thing that they created. Like we are now an on demand society. I want it, I buy it, I pay for it, or I want it, I pay for it, I buy it, and it shows up. And in some cases, you can even get it in 4 hours, right? If not less. So, like, this is where we're living right now, and where my kids, who are now older than yours, Albert, they're going on 18 and 14. They're going to be living in a completely different universe. And I always joke with them, right? And I say to them as I created the internet, which it's not obviously true, but I helped work with people like Greg and build the foundations of what they are using now. And so infrastructure is king. If you own the infrastructure, you can create the infrastructure, then there's definitely going to be an advantage for you. But then if you look at what all the large organizations are doing, which Greg and I were talking about this before the show, we're creating TME organizations, so telco, media, and entertainment groups, right? They've realized that that is the convergence. It's the infrastructure, which is the telco, media, which is your application, the entertainment is the content. right? And it's how you're delivering it over what infrastructure and what you're doing. And we're paying for all of that. So it almost seems, at least today, it's clear that we're in a transitional phase. But it seems like there's a lot of hodgepodgey stuff that's being done in order to put all of this together. No matter what anybody's saying, no matter what anyone's talking about with 5G. I mean, we were just at a conference in October, on October 28th in Brampton, Ontario, where there was a panel and everybody agreed that we're kind of like 4.7 5G right now. We're not quite there. And everybody's already talking about 6G and nobody really understands what that's meant to be. So this is kind of the next wave of things that are coming on. So Greg, I'm going to give you the last word here, and Albert, let you sign off. But Greg, any other thoughts in terms of future proofing, or just where you see this going?
I think it's, maybe a closing comment is it's all about the customer experience, right? Clients or companies to be focused on delivering, whether you're Disney Plus or whoever it may be. And what is that for that next generation customer? What is that? How do you deliver that content? But I think it's the consumer is now in control, right? 20 years ago, that was not the case. Programmers were programming on a wall trying to figure out how to best leverage all their content. Now it's in the library. You can pull it down and watch it when you want. But it'd be interesting to see where this market goes. I think I'll go back to my analytics and AI and delivering a better experience, a better value. I think consumers are pushing back. We are in a bit of a recession. You see what's going on, for example, down at Disney parks. They're shifting and changing some of their pricing because consumers are saying, I'm paying way too much and I'm not getting access to what I want to get access to. Same thing's going to happen on the content side of the world where you're paying all these different subscriptions. So hopefully something will come together to create some uniform guide or search capability that if you like watching this, here's where you can watch it and how you can watch it. Metaverse is interesting. I think that's ways down the road. But it's an exciting time to be in the business. There's still a lot of great content being made. I think there's content that's underserved. There's audiences that are underserved. But hopefully those will come through with some of the new content that's coming out, because it's now less expensive to create content than ever before. I'm not saying you do it with your iPhone, but if you said 10 years ago, I use my iPhone to create a TV show, they'd say you're out of your mind. I mean, Sundance just happened this past week, and there's a number of interesting shows coming out of there. Some that were done relatively, very inexpensively done, but getting lots of positive response. So it's nice to see that other content coming to fruition. It's not just coming out of a big studio. So it's a great time to be in the business.
You have anything else to add there, Sandeep?
No, I just want to thank Greg for being on. I mean, this was fantastic, and there's a lot of hooks in a lot of things that you said here. So we definitely would love to have you back on, because I think there's some roads to expand on there.
Great, love it.
Yeah, and
welcome to the episode. Thanks, guys.
All right, no problem. And just to wrap up, what just for the people out there that listen to the show, everybody always, like we say here, our motto is that to research, prepare, plan, and execute on all those things. And when I listen to all these conversations right now, I see that there's a lot of gobbling up of different companies, probably within the entertainment space. And we look at like companies in the telecom industry that seem to be the big giants here. Cybersecurity looks like it's going to be very big as well. So always do your due diligence if you are investing. And Greg, Willis, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you will be back on the show. And of course, this is the segment with Tech with Sandeep. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Alex.